everyone, welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Maxine and I love knitting, I love cats and I love hair dye. Those are the three things that keep me going in life. Today we're doing a podcast, which is something I've never done before. I am just going to rant and rave to you about the history of knitting. The podcast is called The Purrfect Stitch. Inspired by my love of knitting and the love of cats. I have 2 cats, 3 tattoos of cats, and a lot of cat-themed paraphernalia in my house, including my mug. We may as well dive on in. So I want you to cast your mind back, way back to the 11th century, and we're going to a place known for the Great Pyramids, a love of cats, so obviously I am a huge fan, and that is ancient Egypt. So the first item known to be knitted with 2 sticks in a similar way to how we knit today was a pair of silk socks called the Coptic socks in ancient Egypt, which I'm going to pop a photo up here for you to see. I think it's amazing that one, an item has survived so long, that skill just came out of the Viking technique Nal Binding, known as knotless knitting, which I'll put a link down below if you want to learn more about that. It's amazing that that is a skill that has continued to develop through time and is still part of a culture today. So from ancient Egypt, knitting sort of took over Europe. It weaved through society, sorry for the pun, and became really popular. Initially, it became popular within guilds and they would use it for making practical items such as stockings and socks. And within the home and by women, it was used for garments and homewares. Once knitting had spread across Europe, we start to see more innovation around knitting and a knitting space. And in 1589, a Englishman called William Lee invented a device or a machine called the stocking frame, and as the name suggests, it was used to make stockings. Lee's invention was the first device that would allow knitting to be done on a mass scale. It was significantly quicker than knitting by hand, but it faced backlash, as a lot of inventions do throughout history. Guilds saw it as a threat, and there was a lot of technical limitations that wouldn't allow the stocking frame to be accepted until 100 years later. So a whole century later it took for Lee's invention to sort of take form, and stockings and socks would go into mass production and make way for the knitting machines we know and love today. Whilst this innovation was going on and paving the way for mass production of knitted garments, knitting with needles was becoming more and more popular, and that was thanks to Queen Victoria. So if you didn't know, Queen Victoria was an avid fan of knitted garments and crocheted items. So she would adorn really elaborate and eccentric shawls and scarves. She popularized knitted garments and actually knitting in upper class circles. Queen Victoria didn't just see it as a fashion accessory, she also saw it as a practical skill, and her patronage to the craft actually inspired a lot of young women to take up knitting. And amazingly, some of Queen Victoria's items that she made herself can still be found in Frogmore House. Like other crafts, knitting has come in and out of fashion. There is one true pioneer to the craft that really did revolutionize how knitting was seen and the types of designs and patterns that are well known and loved today. And her name is Elizabeth Zimmerman, and she is a true pioneer of knitting in the 20th century. Her enthusiasm and innovative techniques have shaped and transformed knitting from a rigid ruled craft to something that's boundless, seamless, and just allows people to express their creativity and their personality through knitting. She challenged the notions of gauge and patterns and encouraged knitters to experiment and personalize their objects rather than just sticking to how things were, how patterns were, making things for them that were unique. To this day, her influence can be seen in everyday knitting circles. That's from her books, from her techniques and teachings, and there are new people following suit every day by picking up needles, which if you haven't, I really do urge you to just give knitting a go. It's something that I think personally for me has actually just allowed me to, one, let my creativity show, and also learn a new skill, learn how to focus, and learn patience, because it does take time. But once you start to pass from beginner to intermediate to advanced, which I'm not an advanced knitter, but once you see your skills improve over time, it is a really pleasing experience. No one can take that skill away from you. And I think that's a really amazing thing about knitting, is it's something that is for you. and you can share that love with other people as well. Which takes me into the world of the digital age and how everything sort of sits today. There are so many communities out there, either in person or online, including YouTube and Ravelry and Etsy, where people can be creative and share their patterns and ideas and talk to each other about their knitting or crochet or craft journey. Social media, though it has its downsides, is also allowed people to connect with each other and share their craft and their skill. And I think it's interesting seeing that knitting and crocheting has become really, really popularized, particularly on social media, but it's still something that is very personal. And though knitting has come in and out of fashion and different trends from granny squares to Fair Isle dawn the catwalks and our everyday life, each era has something new. And for us, that is the digital age, and the world that we live in now is allowing people to build a community. But also, materials have changed over time. So, using more sustainable materials and different techniques, we've created a new world of knitting, and I am really excited to see where that goes. And if you are too, make sure you give this video podcast a thumbs up, hit subscribe, leave me a comment. Thank you for joining me on the Purrfect Stitch podcast. I will see you in the next episode.